Hello everybody and welcome back to the HorrorMaker podcast. My name's Pat Higgins, and over the last few episodes and indeed onwards into the future, I've been speaking to some of the leading lights of independent film production. Today we're very, very lucky to be joined by the one and the only Christian James. Hello Christian.
Hi Pat, how you doing? That's a hell of an intro. Thanks, buddy.
For anybody listening, if you haven't come across Christian's work before, Christian has been involved in some of the more interesting independent horrors, sometimes veering into comedy horror that we've actually seen in the country over the last few years. Started out with a micro-budget movie called Freak Out, which was, I'm sure we'll get the chance to chat briefly about Freak Out, as I understand it, quite a long shoot, but certainly a very interesting and funny and strange and incredibly unique movie to kick off with. Moving through into movies like Stalled. We spoke to Dan Palmer, the star of Stalled, on the podcast a little while ago. And now we've got Fanged Up, which is a new vampire movie which is premiering at FrightFest. And I'm sure Christian will be able to tell us all about that very shortly. Christian, I've got to kick off with, where did all this start, man?
Yeah, there's some yin and yang. So it started. It's a bit of a cliche now, but at the time, I think many people from my age and generation were doing the same thing. It's the first time that camcorders were in. So you had, what was it, VHS-C, wasn't it? Those little old tapes used to load in, blah blah blah. But yeah, so my dad had one of those, and it's the old classic. Mum bought it for my dad. Dad never touched it, but when mates would come around my house, we'd always just get my dad's camera out and like muck around with it, you know. Next thing I know, I'd be running around the garden with his camera and, you know, picking at bushes and like, oh god, it's dad's birthday present. It doesn't matter. But yeah, so lots of that, and I would always get that. I suppose it's I had a creative childhood, and mum and dad were pretty good at nurturing that. I went to I think I wasn't doing particularly well in school. Really dialing back now, aren't I? Wasn't doing particularly well in school. I was a bit of a academic lost cause, but mum and dad decided to send me to a Waldorf Steiner school, which is a very creative kind of place, right? Called teachers by their first names. And
how old were you at this point?
Probably about 7. I think.
Oh, bloody hell! Right, okay.
Yeah, 7 or 8 maybe, and I went from that probably to the age of I don't know, I can't remember, but maybe 11ish or 12. I was a social experiment for my parents. They did that for a while. Let's send him to a real kind of hippie tree hugger style school. And when he's right in that zone, that's all he knows, we'll rip him out and we'll chuck him into the dirtiest state school we can find. Right, and then I went to this, why aren't we running around doing bark rubbings on trees? And so
you got both sides of the education, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Anyway, so I think somewhere around that time, I going to this a normal school. I was like, oh, this isn't very creative, and I started to muck around and do creative endeavors outside of school more and more, and dad's video camera was one of them. It never occurred to me as a career ever until I think it came time to look at a prospectus or two from colleges. It's like, what are you gonna do next? It's like, I hadn't really thought about that, and I always sort of presumed I'd do something that involved illustration or something.
Yeah.
But then I remember going through the prospectus, and in it for the Bournemouth Art College, BPCAD, as it was, I think it might still be called that, but as it's certainly then called, they had in the prospectus they had a guy on a crane, or like on a little an old Chapman sort of style crane, the old classic, probably a still from like the 1950s or something. But it looked great. I was like, I could be that guy. I'd like to be on a camera crane operating a camera. And it was like a bolt of lightning at that moment. I could do this for a living.
Yeah.
Like, is that do that? And and then I applied to film school and eventually got in, where I met Dan Palmer, frequent collaborator Dan Palmer, who I know you've had on before. And Dan and I were the youngest on the course. I might be crossing over into a bit of familiar territory to previous HorrorMaker listeners, but yeah, Dan and I were the youngest on the course, and I think because of that, I mean, we got on really well anyways, but we also gravitated together because it was almost like the average age was around 21, and everyone was like, right, you two stick together. We got the shit jobs like props and God, I don't, but we were very childish, even for 17, being one of the youngest in the course, pretty we're idiots. But that's not changed really. But so, and then through Dan, I suppose, and like-minded people at college, I had this kind of like filmmaker thing. I was like, oh, okay, this is it was like coming out of the closet in a way. Coming out of the filmmaker's closet, like it's I remember again as a kid, like I go to a mate's house and I remember watching, like, for instance, Poltergeist 2 once.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, that was awesome. Let's we watched it the night, and then the next morning I was like, should we watch it again? And my friends look at me like, no, why are we watching it again? What's wrong with you? And I was like, oh yeah, yeah, no, let's not do that. It's rubbish. But then I meet like-minded people that would happily watch a film, at night and then watch it again the next morning. And I would all, I met people for the first time that happily just geek out about films. I'd never really found those kind of people.
I mean, in the days before the internet, it was a revelation, wasn't it? To actually find people where you could sit and talk about Poltergeist 2, or you could sit and, do 6 movies on the bounce, just watching stuff, finding people going, oh, wow, and just being able to discuss it. Because nowadays people kind of take it for granted that those souls are there. But, it could be a real revelation.
Like, movie trivia was not, so finding out that, James Cameron once wrote a Spider-Man movie, like, what? Hey? And, like, so we'd all share little tidbits we might have picked up from your Fangorias or your Cinescapes, isn't it? I can't remember the old magazines going back a bit. But, and then through Dan, and then obviously college, blah, 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 and then higher education, etc., etc. But I say, to answer in a very long-winded way your original question, that's where the bugs, that's where it kicked in, reading that prospectus, and there's some ebb and flow even within that. I remember going to the first couple of weeks at college thinking, oh God, have I made the right decision? Am I ever want to make like worthy documentaries about, we want to make, hard-hitting documentaries about the local Dorset incinerator, and I was like, I just and there was a second, actually, as a second eureka moment for me, probably a year or so later, and Edgar Wright was a year above us. And I remember Edgar was, I've talked about this previously, sort of publicly, but Edgar was clearly, even then, a highly talented chap. I remember there'd be a fancy dress party or some such, and he'd turn up with an absolutely dynamite Bruce Campbell or Ash, out costume. I'd be like, shit, that's really good. And anyway, but I remember Edgar played dead right to all the guys all the guys and gals in the on the course, and I was like, oh, okay, so you don't have to do a documentary about gambling or the Dorset incinerator, or so it's like, oh, and at that point, I think, and probably a similar effect for Dan, and we sort of ploughed on and did our own thing more. So I think seeing Edgar's semi-short film kept me on for the second year, and then throughout that second year with Dan, we just went off and did our own thing. And
how did this turn into what was going to be the lengthy shoot for Freak Out?
So we had floated a few. We'd made a documentary, a Star Trek documentary. Lots of puerile humour and highly unprofessional, but that's also, I suppose, our thesis project, if you will. This documentary, but it was great. We did end of year premieres. Everyone else does for their films, and it was a real buzz. And I suppose ultimately that must have sparked something. And then from there on, we developed a couple of movie ideas. Hideously naive looking back on it. I mean, God knows what we're thinking, but we we made a short, actually it's a trailer on Super 8 film, transferred it to video, but shot it on Super 8 film, the old cartridges you could put in a Super 8 camera, send away, develop, come back. So taught me a lot inadvertently in so many headaches and so many issues. It taught me a lot about developing film, shooting on film, transferring film, which would ultimately lead on to doing Freak Out.
What was the format for Freak Out?
The Freak Out was 60mm, not Super 16, 60mm, 4:3 ratio. So it's pretty old school. But so we had a few projects developed, but we both went on to do a degree course, both myself and Dan, and ultimately, whilst developing Freak Out as a script, I'd made a short film which sort of became, I suppose, the germ that is effectively the idea of Freak Out in a nutshell. And as we're entertaining some other maybe bigger budget ideas, we're like, why don't we just do this sort of serial killer idea? That seems perfect for a low budget horror. And it grew from there. And the original pitch was that we originally and anyone that's seen Freak Out will be like, what the hell? But our original take on it was, what would happen if Woody Allen were to direct a Friday the 13th movie?
Right.
That was our kind of like, that was our initial, that'd be what. And I was obsessed with what would happen if you know, whilst Jason or Michael Myers, whilst they're waiting around to machete someone under the bed, what are they doing for the preceding couple of hours? You know, that was the thought process behind it. You know, where they hung out, you know, in his cabin. What does he do? You know, he's got to kill a lot of time. But we didn't ultimately explore any of that, because when it takes 4 years, film, it just inherently becomes something else. So you end up just going, oh, okay, we can't do any of that stuff anymore because that actor's left, so we'll just do something else. So and then ultimately we left our higher education courses to make Freak Out, and that's a whole other podcast in itself.
And did you find that? I mean, how many years was that shoot in the end, from first frame to locked picture?
Give or take a month.
Yeah.
4 years.
Oh, did you find at that point that was it? That the creative tank was empty? That it was like, screw this, I'm never going through this process again? Or was it that at that point you thought, all right, this has been an incredibly long journey. However, it set us up with so much information for the next journey that you couldn't wait to get back on the horse? What was the vibe?
A bit of both. So, you've got to start off that kind of thing with an immense amount of enthusiasm.
Yes.
And looking back, it's like, again, kind of embarrassing, some of the phone calls I would have made to people trying to, you know, beg for money and you know, what they must be thinking. But ultimately, that's how you learn as well.
Totally.
So, I mean, I liken making Freak Out to doing 50 short films. Yeah. It was never, you know, there was never an overarching goal to this. I mean, I lied. There was an overarching goal because we had the script from day one, I suppose. But
how closely did it stick to that in the end?
From the original concept, which is we went way off base, and certainly the first couple, you know, I'd say the first act, and maybe a bit more, was always the same-ish to the original script, to some degree. But it certainly, you know, went off the rails as it progressed, because you just lose people and go, oh, okay, well, we've smashed enough stuff in that house and sprayed enough crap up their walls. They won't let us film there anymore. So what about if we did a scene out front? We've never seen the outside of Merv, the main character. We've never seen the outside of his house. So, okay, Dan, what if we go to your house and suddenly your house becomes Merv's? You know, that's what we do. You know, it just you cater the movie as you go. You know, but yeah, so it's like shooting a lot of short films, and eventually, several years into it, you start to cut all these short films together and find you might actually have a film. So, and for a long time, there was never light at the end of the tunnel. It was just literally not drudgery. That sounds like it wasn't like that. Like we wouldn't have done it if we hadn't enjoyed it. But certainly, it's like we had to kick ourselves up the ass, and we'd take turns. You know, we'd ever, you know, sometimes I would be the one dropping the ball, or Dan would be, and we would push each other on, like, go do that scene, and blah 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 blah. So it was a lot of, you know.
I may have misremembered this because it's a little while since I saw Freak Out more or less when it came out, so it's a little while. But if my memory serves me right, there's a scene where there's a questionnaire that gets completed, and the question that's visible on it is something like, will Freak Out ever actually be finished? Or something like that is the visible questionnaire. And it was one of those things where while I was watching it, I just had this glimpse into what frame of mind would have been there at the point that was kind of filled in. I didn't know if that was...
I think the question... You're right. I can't... Yeah, Merv goes to, halfway through the film, he goes to have a job interview. That's it. And the interview, the boss is a Radio 1 in-house movie reviewer at the time, James King.
Right.
And James, James very kindly played the boss, but he had a very short window. So he said, well, you can come to the Radio 1 offices, you know, in the centre of London. So we went up there with all our crap and just filmed in there. We had like an hour to shoot all this stuff, no time at all. At the time, I thought this is ridiculous, but actually, it turns out that's actually what filmmaking is. And every shoot I've ever done since, you know, healthy budget commercials are exactly the same. It's like, you've got. By the way, you've only just arrived and you're half an hour behind schedule. You know, so. But yeah, I think the question might have been, again, if memory serves, but it might have been, will Freak Out actually be any good? And
Oh, right, okay.
Merv ticks, it says no, no, it won't. But it's yeah, that's right. Yeah, good memory though, Pat. I forgot about that.
I really enjoyed it. I mean, I really dug it as a movie. I thought, and I thought it had an incredible sense of. I think there's an incredible confidence to it in terms of how willfully strange it goes. In terms of the Larry Hagman stuff, and I don't want to go into too far in spoiler territory for him, but just go and watch it, buy it. I'm sure you can find it. Imagine it's still on Amazon. So watch it right away. But I thought that kind of feeling of. Freshness and that feeling of kind of freewheeling, don't give a shitness. I think there was a part of me that thought that must have been incredibly hard to sustain over 4 years because you start to outthink yourself. You know what I mean? I think that the longer projects go on for, sometimes the more weird edges get knocked off them.
I think the reverse happens.
Really?
It's a great observation, and I'd never really seen it like you just become embarrassed by your work after a while, don't you? And then you only see it for all the flaws.
Yeah.
And is at the peak of that. I'm like, in fact, my editor and I were working on Fanged Up late last year, and then the Blair Witch, Adam Wingard's Blair Witch came out, and I was like, now would be a good time, maybe, because there's a little Blair Witch homage within the film. The characters of the movie we set a scene in a theatre, and a conversation happens, but the backdrop to the conversation is they're watching the Blair Witch Project play, and at the time the Blair Witch Project had just come out, which is how long ago it was.
Right, yeah.
So, and it's kind of ridiculous. I love the idea of them putting on a play, a stage version of the Blair Witch Project, and it's a joke I was wanting to redo because it's very Amdram version, but annoyingly when I watched the Brilliant Hot Fuzz, it's like, damn it, they just did it with Romeo and Juliet. They didn't rip off our gag. There's no way Edgar would have seen that, but it's just like it just goes to show how similar the sensibilities are. But yeah, what was it? I've lost my thought. What was it? What were you saying, Pat? I've gone off. I went off.
I was talking about how difficult it must be to maintain that sense of creativity and off the cuffness over a long shoot.
No, so absolutely. I think it went the other way. I think we ended up almost overthinking it. We'd have an idea, then we'd get bored of that idea. We'd rethink the idea,
right,
and then it'd evolve again. Occasionally, we get lost in our own jokes, and we'd start somewhere, reinvent the joke, and suddenly go, hang about, this makes no sense anymore because the viewer doesn't know.
Yes, hasn't been on that journey.
Yeah, so it got a little bit self-indulgent here and there, and I think we had to cut a few of those things out. But no, I think it was maybe that irreverence is all the more magnified because we're almost like so used to whatever we conceived that we were like, okay, let's just do this. Fuck it, now do this, and it just escalated from there.
So on from Freak Out, we moved to Stalled, which again was one that obviously we did kind of discuss with Dan a little bit when he was on the show. You directed Stalled but didn't write it.
No, exactly.
Was that freeing or?
It was kind of good timing because I suppose with Freak Out we had just sat down and Dan was always, even then, Dan would always I'd crash at his house, crash on his bedroom floor. That was back in the days where bad backs were never a problem. I'd literally sleep on his hardwood floor. God, that wouldn't happen anymore. But we'd stay up late and we'd watch probably, a Channel 4 documentary on bestiality and then go, right, let's like to do some more Freak Out writing. Usual healthy diet, a lot of Marmite on toast. But yeah, even then we kick stuff around. But Dan would always do the physical writing. I've never had the attention span. I've always, I'm pretty aware I've got very good focus, but a terrible attention span. So when something's got me, I'm very, very focused. But if something distracts me, I'm like, oh, look at that, and I'm over there. So, but Dan's very good at sitting down for 6 hours and making himself right. I would just no chance. So as we evolve as creatives, Dan just evolved into a writer, and I involved, directing. It was always, I suppose we've got inherent skills that complement each other. So, and I'm quite comfortable on a movie set and juggling plates, and people ask me 1,000 questions. It makes sense to me. It doesn't, I don't tend to have too much of a meltdown. So, no, as we evolved, Dan. So certainly with Freak Out, Dan did the bulk of the physical writing. So when it came, by the time we got to Stalled, which is actually I suppose, although for the uninitiated, it's actually our second film. There are a couple of films in between. We had Big Cats, a film of a fairly healthy budget, was in pre-production at Pinewood Studios that fell apart in the 2009.
Right.
So that was supposed to be the next film.
And who was that one that you and Dan had written, or was that?
Yes, it's similar. I developed it with Dan, but Dan wrote it.
Right.
So, like any director, really, you sit there and you shape and mold, and this is what I want to do, and I don't like that, and I can't see that scene, and Dan is ultimately the one that does the hard work effectively before the shoot. So by the time it got onto Stalled, it was just Dan was the writer part of it, and in fact, usually I'd always develop stuff with Dan. In that instance, Dan, and I think you mentioned this on your podcast before, and went into some detail, but I'm usually with Stalled because I didn't want to do a zombie movie, and I was kind of saying, God, why on earth with Freak Out do we do so many locations? The next thing we do, it needs to be contained. Dan was, if memory serves, I may be wrong on this, but Dan was often fighting or rallying against the single location thing to some degree. Because much like zombies, just when you think it's done, something else really good came out. But anyways, then he just came out and said, "Oh, look, read this." Didn't tell me it had zombies in it, because I think if he'd had, I'd have gone, nah, or just not got around to reading it. So I just, and then as I read it, I was hooked. And there are ultimately some alterations. And director buddy, Peter Stanley Ward, he got involved too and did some suggestions. And between the three of us, there was a few tweaks and some changes. But ultimately, the script that got finished is not a million miles away from Dan's original draft, I don't think.
I mean, I think that's such a tight movie. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed both Freak Out and Stalled, but I think it's really interesting that as a creative team, I personally didn't feel that the strengths of Stalled were the same as the strengths of Freak Out necessarily. I think that they both, and I think that Stalled is tight. I don't, so it's one location. It's and for that kind of thing, it could potentially have so much flab just because you kind of think, oh Christ, how are we going to spend an hour and a half in this location? I don't think there's much downtime in Stalled. Stalled doesn't feel like it meanders. It feels very focused in the way where part of the charm of Freak Out is that it feels kind of meandery and whatever. So,
wonders,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, Stalled has diversions, but they all seem to have a point. They all seem to be taking character forward or taking narrative forward or whatever. And for a film that has such a crazy setup, I think it's incredibly effective at what it does. And I just really dug the shit out of it. I really liked it. It was great.
Thanks, buddy. That's really nice of you. I think maybe you don't know what goes into your. It's hard to work. Just your experiences leading up to that, what informs the film you make. Perhaps watching Freak Out so many times and with it being so loose, it's a weird one because Freak Out's more like the second movie. We shot it on film. It's got multiple locations. It's indulgent. It's all over the place. Yet you'd think the story sounds more like the first movie. Like lean, tight, short, sharp. But I think it's more that we've done that. Let's just do the opposite. So and it just felt right. I remember we had discussions with other producers about making the film. I don't really know how close they got to getting off the ground, but certainly a few of them weren't quite on the money with the idea. It's like, well, how can we get it? And this has often been told on other, I've heard it before with phone booth, etc. But it was the same thing. We had those same notes. It's great, love it's all in the whole movie in the toilet cubicle. But how can we get it out of the cubicle? And you're like, you can't. And not only can you not. You really can't. I mean, there's a visual rule that we really couldn't go where WC doesn't. The main character doesn't. If he doesn't go there, we can't go there. If he can't see it, we can't see it. That was a visual rule, which is right. Quite frankly, it was a pain in the ass. But I think it helps the movie subconsciously when you watch it.
Yes, I think you're right. It would have felt very, very odd to break from that point of view in a severe. You'd lost something totally. Yeah, and
you're breaking your contract with the audience. If I'm saying to you, I've got this idea for a movie. It's the whole thing is set in a toilet cubicle. The guy's trapped in a toilet cubicle for 90 minutes, and I promise you I'll entertain you for that 90 minutes. Come with us, have some fun. And the first thing we do is cut away from the toilet cubicle. Well, it's like as a viewer, I'd be like, "Fuck you," So I think it's I've drifted up. Well, actually, where have we gone, Pat? We've gone. Where do we start? I've lost.
We're going on a journey. There'll be wild and wonderful things along the way.
I was going to wrap that up, and I can't actually remember where we were even heading towards.
Bring it back.
Yeah.
Well, that's narrative for you. So anyway, Stalled, as I say, I think was something that had, from my perspective as a viewer, I think it delivered on all that stuff that you said. It said, here's this premise, go with it, and it just did, and it took it in a couple of directions people wouldn't expect. It's got more heart than people would expect. It's got some great gore gags and stuff like that along the way, and to me, it just delivers everything that you see on the box. So. With that going, what was the next logical step going from that, and how did the next project come about? I noticed I've got your IMDb page up, I must admit. I'm not cheating, it's just sort of there. We've got a couple of shorts in between Stalled and Fanged Up. Any sort of notable stops along the way?
So notable stops would be, I did so Emma Biggins, who was line producer on Stalled. She was roommates with or housemates with David, not roommates actually. No. Don't want to start any housemates with David Oakes and one of his best pals, Holiday Granger, who had just signed on to Cinderella.
Right.
They were saying about sort of let's get together. They were talking to Emma about getting together, and it'd be great to make a short, and we could charge people for it, and raise some money for a charity which David was and is still very much in with, so it kind of came from that really. Emma raised a tiny bit of money and said, CJ, you round next couple of weeks and you've got any ideas for a short? And as it happened, I'd been just kicking an idea around with a writer buddy, Matt Brothers, and I was like, and he actually, in fact, we were catching up more to the point, and he pitched me this idea. I was like, oh yeah, cool, and we just kicked it around. And about a day later, I got back to Matt saying, Matt, that idea we talked about yesterday, do you want to do it next week? And Matt was like, what? Hey, what? I was like, no, we could shoot it next week. So literally, Matt scribbled some stuff out, and then we a week later we were shooting that. That was quite a nice little. And that was more of, I suppose, a little. While Stalled was in post production, it was nice to get out and make something.
And which one was that?
Goblin. So that's just a sort of fairly not improvised in the day, but certainly. This is what we've got, this is what we'll do, kind of thing. So that was a nice little bit, a fun segue. Then Stalled came out. We sold out, not literally. Well, no, we literally sold out in every way, shape, or form. We sold out any way you can sell out. We did. But it was, I suppose, something of a success in FrightFest. We were very lucky. Our screening sold out straight away. And then the Metro picked up on that. So when they do a sort of pre-festival write-up, and they sort of said, well, the movie to watch out for this year is Stalled. It's sold out. And I was like, shit! It's without doubt the lowest budget movie in the festival that year. And I was like, oh, crap. Now they're putting this pressure on it. And then, we turned up at the festival. There were queues around the, sort of around Leicester Square to get Stalled tickets. Or there were many screenings, but a lot of the chatter was, I'm here to get Stalled tickets. I was like, oh, shit! But anyways, people were very kind. We got some amazing reviews, and I was constantly bowled over by the amazing reviews we got. There are some haters, but mostly lovers. So that was marvelous. So that and Alan Jones, head of FrightFest, was a real champion of our movie. So much so that he sort of commandeered all the Q&As with us and blah blah blah. So a great guy, and really sort of like he would steer people towards Stalled as much as he could, for which we're eternally grateful. And so Stalled went on to be something of a success. Certainly not a breakout hit. I wouldn't class it, but enough to put us on a very small dot on the map. Enough so that when Channel 4 were looking to relaunch 4OD as All 4, inspired by Lights Out, thank you David S. Sandberg, they wanted to create 5 or 6, can't remember how many it was, 6 horror shorts in that style about the scare everyday, just these scares from everyday life situations, and I had been put, I don't know how my name had been bandied around, but I was on the list of potential directors to talk to thanks to Stalled. Cut a long story short, kicked around a few ideas. Dan had a really strong idea. I remember chatting to Dan saying, I really want to do something about getting up in the middle of the night. I had another idea, but once again, Dan, knowing what I like and knowing how I work, I'd had this other sort of thing developing. I was like, but I like the idea of getting up in the middle of the night and going for that, going to the toilet and being just your guards down. And Dan's like, yeah, okay, I think I've got it. Went away and came back with Night Feed. I was like, oh yeah, perfect. That's exactly what I want to do. I don't think I changed a word. I didn't change anything. It's like, boom, that's it. Got a storyboard artist. We storyboarded it. I pitched it to Channel 4. They loved it. Supposedly we're the only one that like, right, you're through, no changes, shoot it. So I got Alice Lowe involved. I'd met her at a film festival in fact, Stall. So it all comes around. I've been to a film festival in Korea, South Korea, not North, and tried North. They wouldn't have me. And I met Alice Lowe briefly. Actually, I can probably let everyone into a little. No, let's do a bit. I didn't really meet Alice Lowe at the festival. I kind of saw her briefly, and that was it. But someone stupidly, by some huge error, clerical error, I was going out for the day. I was killing time between screenings. And I wanted to get on the tube and just wander around South Korea for the day. I was stupid idea. But the one of the ladies at work was like, "You're doing what?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to go out and about for the day and see if I can get and trust me, it's really hard. If you going around South Korea, it's very difficult because nothing's in English. So you've got to be very and everything. It's a visual feast. So trying to find, you can't say, "Oh, I'll find the Samsung store," or everything's like, what? So they gave me they were like looking at me like, "Please don't do this," but I was like, "I'm going to do it anyway." So they gave me a list, like here's a brochure with a load of contact names in it. Take it. If you get stuck, my number's there and so-and-so's number's there. And okay, great. Anyways, what they had done stupidly, they give me the list also had all the names and details of every other person in the festival. So I'm like, what? And I saw Alex Lowe. I was like, what? Hey, brilliant. So I parked that safely in my suitcase. And when it came to Night Feed, I was like, I've got Alex Lowe's details. So I just dropped an email. And she's like, love to, great. Let's, and Night Feed's based around, a young mum, someone's given birth and they get up in the middle of the night to feed their baby. And as I was pitching it to Alice, she told me that, oh, by the way, in fact, this happened to me twice. As I pitched it to the producer, it turned out she just had twins. And I was like, oh, this could be really awkward. She's either going to slap me and get a punch in the face, or it could go down. And she loved it. She was amazing. She thought it was great. And then same with Alice. And as I was pitching it to Alice, she's like, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant. I was like, oh crap! Oh my, what the hell is going on? So, but no, again, she loved it and thought it was great. And, so Night Feed comes out on all four, and again, great bit of PR. Plays on Film 4 because it's a co-production between Channel 4 and Film 4.
Cool.
Plays on Film 4 throughout the next year's FrightFest and plays at FrightFest. So I'm back at FrightFest again.
Fantastic.
And then I keep saying the phrase "cut a long story short," but I'm not doing it. So lot of editing here, Pat. But and then from that, the makers of Fanged Up. In fact, so Dan, I suppose, full disclosure, Dan and I had a few films in development. Look promising, fall apart.
Yeah.
And
I know that story.
It's like we'll aim for stalled to hit. Let's aim for this amount of money.
Yeah.
Okay, let's aim for this amount of money. And by the third concept in, we're like asking for less money than stalled again. Yeah. And we're like, gee, this is just ridiculous. And I remember having a conversation with my wife, saying, God, I really thought Stalled might have opened up a few more doors. And I had another one of those down moments where I'm like, well, but I was getting a lot of commercial bookings and that was getting some traction. I was like, well, I'm happy. I'm a filmmaker ultimately, and I love being on set and making films. And if I'm making branded content commercials, that's cool. I'm happy to do that. I love doing it. But film's always, the ultimate goal. And I sort of said to my wife, like, what? I just don't get it because we've got, proven a bit of a track record, and but just nothing's landing, and just and we'd work with producers that would go, yeah, it's all go. We've got half the money, the rest is coming, and then they just go quiet, and you're like, what's going? I don't, to this day I don't know what's going on, but you just have to, duck the punches and blah blah blah. But yeah, so said to my wife, like, I might just maybe put the film stuff on a back burner for a bit of time. It's not like a film's just going to land in my lap. I would say 2 months later, out of the blue, I kid you not, an email out of the blue, never happened before. Email out of the blue. You've been you're on our shortlist as a director. We should chat to you about this new movie we've got developed called Fanged Up. Okay, so I reply going, yeah, sure, fine, happy to be on the list. And they're like, well, actually, time's of the essence. Can we send you the script? If you like it, we'll have a meeting. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. So they sent me the script. I did and didn't like it in equal measure. I'm not speaking ill of it because I've talked to everyone involved about the script. And I read the script, love the setup, love some of the characters in it, but ultimately thought it was like, with the schedule you've got, the budget you've got, and also just it's not the kind of thing where it went is something I wouldn't want to do potentially necessarily. Yeah. So as tempting as it is to have a film offered to you, and my ego was well and truly massaged, I said, I don't know if I could make this work. So a couple of meetings later, and I sort of did try to step away from it, but the producers were quite keen to get me involved, which is lovely of them. And we're like, well, what would you want to make to get you involved? I was like, well, I'd love to get Dan Palmer in to rewrite it because he knows my style and what I like. And it's no secret now, but at the time, controversial comedian Dapper Last, aka Dan O'Reilly, was involved. Actually, I must admit, and I have since sort of mentioned this to Dan, part of me was a bit like, oh, okay. And I did a bit more research on him and was like, okay, I saw his stuff and some of it's cool, some of it's not so much for me. But I could see the potential in there. But certainly I was like, I don't know if I'm the guy to do this. I don't know if I'm the guy for the material. So I said to Richard and Terry that I would probably not be the horror side of thing would be me. And certainly some of the gags, but maybe there's some other stuff in that's certainly not my style. But I met Dan, really liked him. I'm so surprised by his non-Dapper Last persona. You forget this character, a very sometimes offensive character by design often. And I liked him, and I thought, maybe this could work. There's definitely an inherent talent there. So I said, Richard sort of thrust a contract under my nose. He said, yeah, great, we'll meet your ridiculous demands. And it wasn't that ridiculous, but we'd like to get involved. So they agreed to get Dan on board. Dan had a week. He said, yes, we'll do all that. Dan's got a week to rewrite it. Dan Palmer's got a week to. So I was like, Dan, you're in. You've got a week. So I basically, Dan, and again, we had that conversation of we sat down over a few coffees and said, I'd sort of say like, yeah, Dan's known me enough by now, but I'd say, I want to do this. I don't want to do that. This is something, this specifically, listen to the script I don't like. And I probably wouldn't even have to sit down with him and tell him that. He knows anyways. We're quite intuitive in that. Pardon me. I just did a burp. I hope it wasn't audible on the podcast.
No, it wasn't. It was just a strange moment of silence.
Yeah. I could have just kept it quiet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Dan vanished for a week, and Richard Turner, the producer, was saying, where's Dan gone? I'm like, he'll be back. He'll be here. Don't worry. And he basically resurfaced a week later with... And actually, no, it's a bit of a lie. He went radio silent to everybody else, but he was coming up for air and sending me notes and thoughts and ideas, and I'd be on the train going to production meetings, Fanged Up, going, yes, do that, don't do that, love this, how about we do that? And there's a lot of back and forth in that sense. And Dan would go dive back down and write furiously for another 48 hours. At least that's what he said he was doing.
Yeah.
He was doing something furiously. But certainly a week later we had a script. And I sort of mildly delayed signing my contract because I thought I was worried about being saddled with a script that I couldn't make, that I pulled up. But I knew the Dan Palmer version I would nail. I knew that version was the one I could do well. So Richard was pressuring me for a script and a contract, and I was going, yeah, both coming. And then eventually we got the script to them on the Sunday night. I was like, well, this is it. Pen over contract, ready to sign. Thinking if they love it, I'm in. If they hate it, I'm out.
Yeah.
And I was on the fence, and they replied, going, "Oh my god, happy." And we made some significant changes, certainly to the lead character of Jimmy, and some quite for Dan O'Reilly for his persona. We played with that quite a bit, and we did stuff I thought he wouldn't go there. We did stuff I thought he won't want to play that, and he did. He was like so happy, so grateful to be able to play a character and not be Dapper Last.
Right, gotcha, yeah.
So it's cool. Yeah, no, and then a week later, and then I think actually, so we handed that in, and probably 2 weeks later we were on set filming it. So it's a real, I think, 1st of October was the initial email, and maybe I think the 14th of November we started shooting. It was
My
insane.
God.
It was I think all the commercials and branded content I did over the years taught me, and Freak Out in many ways. Freak Out was a great exercise in turning up to someone and going, right, what have we got? This is a script. This is what we've got here in front of us, and rethinking on your feet.
Yeah.
So for 4 years, I did that with Freak Out, and then everything else since has been that too. So I storyboard and prep the hell out of anything, but then ultimately I get somewhere and go, right, okay, everything's changed. Let's do this instead. So yeah, it was like then a month of that in a prison in Portsmouth.
That's amazing. And that's then on FrightFest, which depending on when people listen to this podcast, they may still be able to catch it at FrightFest if it's too late or obviously sold out. Where has it got another stop on the film festival circuit where people might be able to catch it?
I don't know.
Okay.
Potentially, yes. There's lots of chatter. We took a big chart. We desperately wanted to get into FrightFest. I've got a great relationship with them, and they've been great supporters of my work.
Yeah,
I was so keen if the film held up to get it in, and I chatted to the guys saying I might have a film ready for FrightFest if you were interested, and they're like, yeah, we'd love to consider it. Obviously, they weren't promising anything, but we'd definitely consider it. And they were pressuring me, sort of saying, well, not they were nudging me, saying, when's the film ready? CJ? I'm like, I can't show it to you. And eventually, because it just post-production takes time, even though we finished it in December. And by April or May, they were like, right, tough, we've got to watch it now. I'm like, oh, God. So I had to show them a locked edit, but a rough edit. No post, no music, no score. Very few visual effects.
Harsh. Oh, yeah, man, that's harsh.
I sent the guys a message saying, look, here's the film. I totally appreciate, you're watching a rough version. But, I didn't want any favours. I didn't want if it doesn't hold up, don't put it in. But ultimately, I got a really nice reply from a couple of the guys there that did see it, and they're like, no, really happy to have it involved. It's we can see potential, so we'd love to include it if you get it finished. I mean, there was it was like, but we'll pull it if you don't get it ready in time. If you don't see progress, we're not putting it in. So they really took a bit of a gamble on us, which I really appreciated. So the film is only just been finished. I mean, I signed off the DCP late last week.
Oh, so God. We're right up to the wire.
Yeah. There's even still a few audio bits and bobs that I'd like. Oh, I'd like to go and tweak those. You don't. Ultimately you have to step away from it and go, well, that's it now. But so FrightFest, Friday the 25th of August, 9 p.m. There's still a few tickets left. Very few tickets, but if you're quick, you might get some. I think all the single seats or the rock up and watch it tickets have gone. I think they've all gone. But I know the day pass holder ones, there's still a few of those left. So that's how you get. If you buy a day pass, you can still get a ticket for Fanged Up and see other films too. And then beyond that, there's chatter and talks of distributors, but I just think it's all under wraps. And certainly from my point of view, I've delivered the movie, so it's kind of
not your problem.
We used to get it was stalled and certainly Freak Out and stalled. We'd get involved in that stuff, but it's quite nice to be in a position where I'm like, do you know what? I've focused on the directing side of it, the creative's done, and there's the movie, and I'm happy with it, and now it's for those guys to step in and do what they do well, which is sell the film. I don't, that's not. I don't want to be a film seller. I'm not. It's always a trick of the film business is a tricky one, isn't it? I want to be making films. I want to, but not necessarily in the producing films business or because sometimes you get bogged down in the whole business of getting films made.
It can feel like such a juggle to be able to keep the things you want to do versus the things you kind of have to do versus all of those little bits, and loads of them are a full-time job in themselves. Just going out and selling a movie is obviously more than one person's full-time job, but directors, producers, writers can all get sucked into that process as well, and before you know it, you're juggling like 3 strands, all of which you could quite happily spend an entire working week on.
You have to do it though. I mean, with Freak Out, we were going around Cannes with a big suitcase full of screeners and just like used car salesmen, but you learn, you inadvertently learn so much from that. I mean, even though I'd rather not have been doing it, but if I didn't do it, no one else was going to do it.
No, exactly.
That's what you do to make it happen, but only over the course of 3 films have I been afforded the luxury of being able to step away and have producers that can do that.
And we've probably run a little bit over, but before we do wrap up, we do ask all of our guests to recommend a movie that they haven't had anything to do with, something that's maybe an underappreciated gem or something that our audience might just dig if they happen to come across it. Can you think of one to recommend to HorrorMaker listeners out there?
I'm going to have to quickly dig into something I've seen recently. So absolutely. What have I seen recently? I mean, ultimately, after next week, I'm sure I'll see a lot of things at FrightFest. So I'll be kicking. Pat, I've thought of like 10 films. But recently, I've had my head in post on Fanged Up, and I tend to be careful about what films I watch.
Yeah.
When I'm immersed in another movie. Yeah. So a film I saw, it came out in 2015. It wasn't an under the radar kind of movie, but I think it just slipped my radar. Was The Final Girl. The Final Girls, rather. Marlene Ackerman's in it.
Yeah.
Sort of Friday the 13th kind of vibe. And I think maybe I'd even had the premise in kind of feeling, and maybe because I've danced around that kind of, that.
Yeah, there are some thematic
genre.
similarities. Yeah.
I was kind of like, I don't know if I'm interested in that. But then I caught it quite recently and really enjoyed it.
I loved that movie as well. Really, really dug it. I thought Marlene Ackerman's performance was really, really cool. It was. Yeah. Actually, I complimented her on Twitter about it, which is what the 21st century is about. Yeah. But yeah, I got to admit,
I did actually. I was on the train going to town, and on my iPhone or Netflix, and on my large iPhone, I might add, bigger screen. But I started watching it on that. Got to early on where the cinema catches fire, and the tone just didn't really sit well with me. I don't know what it was, coming from someone who's loves to shift tone left, right, and centre is terrible. Really, I should be more patient. But yeah, I don't know what it was, but I just wasn't into it, so I turned it off, and then came back to it maybe a month or so later and carried on and start from scratch and loved it. Yeah, just really really struck a chord. I thought it was a really nice balance of homage but still being its own thing as well. So no, that was great. But and only after watching it, I then went online and what's the deal with that film? And actually saw it got some pretty solid notices and a bit of reputation. So but that's one recently that springs to mind.
Yeah, I loved that movie. So that's a full thumbs up from me as well. We probably better wrap this up. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for an insight into a movie that's as fresh as Fanged Up is, because I realise sometimes it can be tough to kind of talk about these things. Are there any other things that you'd like to plug to our fantastic audience before we sign off for the day?
Yes, thanks, Pat. I would. So you can find me on Twitter at CJamesDirect, on Twitter. Also, I do a almost weekly podcast. I'm sort of like a sort of regular or semi-regular host. There's a few of us doing it. Giles Alderson, and is the key host, and the others, Dan and Dan and a few of the guys. We sort of bounce in and out. But that's the Filmmakers podcast. It's called at Filmmakers Pod, at Filmmakers Pod on Twitter, and it's filmmaking specifically tailored to the likes of you and I. Cool. Because there's a lot of jobbing, working filmmakers out there, and we're looking to talk about this. I suppose the day-to-day of filmmaking, and the sort of the warts and all of it, really. The life on set, and just swaps. I suppose evolving my career so far. As a director, you don't get to really hang out and chat with other directors.
Absolutely. This podcast has given me the opportunity to chat to more directors.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it's awesome.
And funny enough, actually, a quick plug, David F. Sandberg, I know, in fact, Dan Palmer pointed out to me recently, but his stuff on Vimeo, which I've just passed me by, but David Sandberg directed Lights Out and Annabelle Creation, as well as Lights Out, the original short. But his stuff on Vimeo is amazing, and there's a great new culture of filmmakers that aren't playing their cards close to their chest anymore, and they are sort of saying, "Here's everything laid bare." So for a filmmaker to say, "I used to make movies in my bedroom with my wife, or my flat with my wife," I said, hold on a second, yeah, back up.
That went down an unexpected path.
Have you not seen those films? Must be a private link in there. Whoa, David. So for someone to make films in their apartment with his partner still doesn't really.
No.
You know what I mean.
Yeah.
So then go from that to a giant set with a crew of 100, and the fact that he just lays bare all his issues he had with that is amazing. So yeah, and we're trying to, I suppose, really, we're continuing that tradition and trying to say,
absolutely.
Well, here's what happens. Here's how it could be. So other wannabe film producers, directors, writers can listen in and might take something handy away from it, I suppose.
Have you got any one piece of advice for anyone out there who is hoping to follow in your footsteps?
It's a real cliche, but just keep doing it and keep making stuff.
Yeah.
Keep making stuff, because of all the stuff, I think of all the stuff I've made, 5% is actually visible or out there, but if you're always making stuff, you're always learning. Just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. Because so many times I've been on set, I've been on Fanged Up, and there's been a crisis, and I'm like, God, if I hadn't done that awful internet viral, all that, terrible commercial, never saw the light of day, if I hadn't done those things where I had to deal with this thing, I'd solve this problem now. And those have taught me so well.
Absolutely. Christian, thank you so much for your time, and everybody who's been listening to it, thank you very much for checking us out. You can follow us at HorrorMaker Team on Twitter, and we will be back with another extended interview fairly soon. So thanks again for listening. Thanks again, Christian, and cheerio.